Welcome to Cross Section, conversations at the intersection of faith, news, and culture. We are excited to be on YouTube. Please subscribe to the Evangelical Alliance YouTube channel to never miss an episode.
It has been a huge week politically, and coming up on Cross Section, we discuss the vote to decriminalise abortion, assisted suicide, and the Grooming gangs report. We are also joined by David Yeghnazar from ELAM to discuss the conflict between Israel and Iran. He shares what life is like for Iranians right now, how God is at work, and also how the UK church can be praying. This is an episode not to be missed. Hello and welcome back to Cross Section, the podcast where we discuss all that's going on in the news as Christians. We are all, well, I was about to say we're all spread across the United Kingdom. That is kind of actually not true because both Danny and I are in London. We're just not both in the office. But I am joined with Danny and Peter this morning. Good morning to you. Well, good afternoon to you both, actually.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
So Zanna is back with the lads of the team. Anyway, it's a huge week politically. It's been a really significant week for the advocacy team. There are lots of big things that kind of have come to a head. So this feels like a really important episode as we discuss all that's been going on. So we are going to start with a kind of big Westminster roundup of the big conversations and things that have been going on. Tuesday was a hugely significant day to do with the decriminalisation of abortion. Peter, can you tell us what happened?
So we've got a crime and justice bill going through, a criminal justice bill, something policing bill, a bill going through, and to which we have, there's been attempts to append a couple of different amendments. NC1 was from Antonia Antoniadze, and NC 20 was from Stella Creasy, and I think there was even a third one on. In the end, one of those was bad. That was NC1. That was essentially to take abortion out of the criminal law. Stella Creasy wanted to go much further, take the 1861 Act out in its totality, change the whole human rights framework, and even the concealment of a body afterwards, all those things to be removed. In the end, the lesser of two evils, and I think that phrase is actually appropriate here, was the one that got voted through. So abortion has essentially been decriminalised. What that means, if the woman performs the abortion herself, there will be no criminal prosecution in the UK right up to birth. So for clarity, if a medic or somebody else performs it, there still would be a prosecution. That is one of the concerns we have about this, is exactly that. It actually pushes people to do it themselves and to take the much more risky. Again, if I can just say for context, we allow abortion in the UK, much as I dislike this, up to 24 weeks. We are already the outlier. That is one of the most liberal abortion regimes in the world. 12 weeks in Portugal, 16 weeks I think it is in Germany, France and Spain are something very similar. Norway, Sweden are like at 18 weeks. 24 weeks is already out there. We have now essentially pushed that right the way up to birth. So that's what happened. That vote has gone through, subject to approval in the Lords, etc. I think then that becomes law at some point. I think that's awful. It wasn't a huge surprise to us, but I don't think people fully understand the consequences of what they voted for.
And I think one of the things was this was an amendment. It happened quickly. We were not blind to the possibility of this happening. This was a wide-ranging crime bill which always had the scope for this to be done, but it was only with a couple of weeks notice that we knew that these amendments were coming and were going to be debated and voted on. There was less than 2 hours of debate in Parliament. Very few backbench MPs got to speak to it. There was virtually no scrutiny to this. And by saying it's a relatively minor technical change, which is what proponents have been saying, actually, they're undermining the fact that this is a really significant shift, that it does, as Peter has said, remove the criminal aspect for women were they to have abortions after 24 weeks. And as Peter said, it incentivizes risky behavior. This is particularly in the context where abortion pills can be received over the phone and by post with no in-person consultation. That was actually one of the other proposals that wasn't supported in the House of Commons, was to reinstate in-person consultations to try to reduce some of these risks and situations. So there's the possibility that someone, either knowingly or unknowingly, who is far further along in their pregnancy, asks for abortion pills over the phone, receives them, takes them, then needs significant medical care and attention because they've taken pills that are inappropriate for the state of their pregnancy at that point in the baby that is alive inside them.
And I think one of the big risks a number of those speaking highlighted, and again, it's not always people from faith background, people from all sorts of backgrounds saying, one of the risks is that once you decriminalise this, while it would remain an offence for somebody else to push for this or to coerce it, so for example, a partner, in reality, the big risk is that they use this as a way. So previously, the woman might have said, well, look, I'm not putting myself at risk of criminal liability to get rid of this baby as partners kind of move in and out of their lives during pregnancy. The risk is at this point they push to say, look, there's no consequences, just get rid of this baby. And that essentially men use this to sidestep the law, and quite a number of campaigners have pointed that out, and I think that is true. So I don't think this protects women's rights. I think that's just not true, and I don't think it's progressive in any way, shape or form. We now have the least protection for the unborn child. We are also, as a consequence, in my view, putting women at actually way more risk than we need to, than we should. I don't like the current law, but even at 24 weeks, that's 6 months into a pregnancy. Like if anything, we should be moving back as viability is so much more possible at stages before that. And again, people were proposing that, and that's where we expected things to move. So we're not following the science. This is an ideologically driven vote. The campaigners on that side have won. I think that's deeply sad. And it comes in a week when we have two votes at both the beginning and end of life. And I just think we need to recognise what's going on in our culture.
Yeah, I think you've both been really helpful in kind of outlining some of the implications. Like, this does have huge consequences, and it is a massive thing. So I would really recommend that you go check out all the work of both lives and what they've been saying. And yeah, just turn to their resources to kind of help you think more about this if it's really got you thinking. But as Peter mentioned, it is a significant week about the start of life and the end of life. So as you are listening to this episode, if you're listening to the day it has come out, Friday, the 20th of June, assisted suicide is back in the House of Commons. Danny, what's happening?
Yeah, so we're recording on Thursday the 19th. Tomorrow, as you say, the debate continues on the assisted suicide bill, Kimberly Beater's terminally ill adults. It is expected that this will be the day that the House of Commons have their main vote on the bill. It won't be the last time they engage with it in all likelihood. They'll probably have to engage after the House of Lords, but this is their chance to vote on the whole bill, on whether they support it. This is effectively them giving their approval to this bill. There probably will be a chance for some more amendments to be debated and discussed, but a tiny proportion of those that have been proposed have actually had a chance to be properly debated and amended. And it is honestly on a knife edge. It passed by 55 votes in November when it was at its earlier stage in Parliament. There have been a number of MPs who have said that they have changed their mind. Who knows whether that is sufficient? We are praying and hoping and working that it is enough that this bill will be rejected. If it is supported by a majority in the House of Commons, it then moves into the House of Lords, and the House of Lords debates, scrutinises and votes on it. That will probably happen either side of the summer, and then if they make amendments to the bill, it will come back for final approval of those amendments into the House of Commons in the autumn. If it isn't supported in the House of Commons, then the bill falls, and that is what we are hoping for. So many people have commented on the dangers of this bill, of the unworkability of it. It's notable that two politically almost you couldn't think of two different MPs, Edward Lee and Diane Abbott, who are the longest serving male and female members of Parliament. They've written a joint editorial in the Times speaking out against it, calling for it to be rejected. So it's dividing people across political opinions, across divisions. But there is also just so many people who are, I hesitate to say this, but not engaging with the concerns people are raising, are trying to shrug them off and say, it'll be fine, we've got enough safeguards, we don't need to include more protection for people, whether it's around mental capacity or anorexia. I find that actually quite concerning that MPs aren't reckoning fully with the concerns people are raising. So many royal colleges are speaking out against it. Even bodies that aren't in principle opposed to assisted suicide are speaking out against this bill and saying this bill is not fit for purpose. This bill isn't good enough and shouldn't be passed. So I think MPs should listen to that. I think they should listen to the chorus of concerns and opposition that is mounting to this. And I can only hope that a sufficient number of MPs do oppose it when it is voted on tomorrow.
Yeah, another intervention from Gordon Brown, former Prime Minister. I think interventions on the Labour side are more important simply because that's where the votes are that are currently carrying this. So that's just a pragmatic reality. If you're in an area with a Labour MP, do try and check out how they voted last time. Do try and engage. Even at this point, it's worth pushing because one MP has indicated they won't be able to make the vote. One of the people who voted against it, Saoirse Eastwood from Northern Ireland, she's sick, she's unwell, not going to be able to travel. This has been one of the factors in this, is a constant coming back and forward on Fridays for MPs who have to travel, a lot of them who aren't normally there on a Friday because it's constituency day. It's been to say it's a game of cat and mouse, that maybe sounds like I'm undermining it. It's not, but it is a real practical reality for people. They're constantly adjusting their plans to try and be there for a vote. And she, who was going to vote against this, isn't going to be there. That's one vote lost, if you like, on our side. So praying literally for people's health, for their travel, for their well-being, to be there at the vote as well as to engage, I think is incredibly important. As Danny said, we now think, not just us, the press are saying, this is down to 15, 20 votes potentially in play here. That's how close this has become. The Prime Minister has reasserted his general backing of this. But the reality is, almost everybody agrees this bill itself is not fit for purpose. MPs should therefore not vote for it. They're basically crossing their fingers and hoping somebody else fixes it. And the reality is that's not actually the way the process works. What tends to happen is it gets worse as it goes through, not that it gets better. Now, the Lords may try and improve it a little bit. And Dan, I think I'm right in saying you told me literally one comma inserted means that once they do that, at least it means there's another vote in the House. So all is not absolutely lost on Friday, but it'd be difficult if it passes Friday to see how it really gets fully thwarted. So our hope and prayer very clearly is vote this down on Friday. And I remember the heaviness on previous rounds, and it will be a heavy day, particularly this week with both ends of this. Worth saying what I said in a video somewhere else this week is, I do think the other things we've talked about the strange awakening, the opening to spiritual kind of realities, the interest in faith, some of these things are a partial reflection of a frustration with where culture is going, the negativity, the kind of nihilism of culture that in every turn is looking for easier ways out, dressing up death, and the culture of death is choice. And people are like, I'm fed up with that. I want something different. So I think there's a massive opportunity in this, but I absolutely hope and pray this vote does not pass.
Yeah, thank you both so much for all of that and the detail. And I'm very aware that as you are listening / watching this, you may well already know. We don't. So this will definitely be a conversation that continues. I'm sure we will be reacting to whatever happens tomorrow next week. And this will be something that we continue to engage with. But yes, we will be praying and bringing it to the Lord. Anything else that has caught your guys' eye this week before we move on to the next conversation?
Well, I'd like to ask either if you know how much the Lakers was just sold for today.
Only because I just Googled it because you asked. No. $10 billion. $10 billion.
It didn't give me a chance to guess.
$10 billion.
Wow.
It's just insane for a sports team. I think it's the most expensive sports team in history.
Gosh.
I did observe that a previous story commented on Kneecap were in the Westminster court. Kneecap, the rap, is that what we call them? Rap, Provo rap band out of Northern Ireland. Sadly, that case is probably becoming a PR stunt more than anything at this moment. But interesting free speech implications potentially. So we're watching that and supporting of terrorism and prescribed organisations. So that also caught my attention this week.
These stories they keep rolling, don't they? It seems like nothing's ever a one conversation thing on this podcast.
A big one that we might return to is the Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, has said that they're looking at the European Convention of Human Rights and whether it needs reformed. And I think that's a European-wide conversation. I actually think two things on that. One, Christians do need to be careful. Some are kind of opposed to it. And actually, it's a thing that has, if you take the classic Asher's gay case. That was a European Convention of Human Rights case. At its core, some of the freedom of religion that we rely on is embedded in that. If we rewrote it now, we probably wouldn't have the same level of protection. That said, I do think some of it's not applied brilliantly, and I do think there's understandable concern and pushback. But we'll be engaging on that, and I think that's a really interesting conversation that will undoubtedly unfold over the next few weeks and months.
Absolutely. So the other kind of big conversation that's been in Westminster this week has also been something that's kind of been bubbling and was, for the last few months has been there have been PMQs where it's dominated. But Baroness Casey has just released the Casey report. The kind of formal title is the National Audit on Group-Based Child Sexual Exploitation and Abuse. So this kind of feeds into the grooming gangs conversation. The government have kind of seemingly U-turned on their response to this. Danny, do you have anything kind of to say about that?
Well, the politics of it is interesting because the government are seemingly in the middle of a spate of U-turns. Keir Starmer had resisted, and Jess Phillips and others had resisted a national public inquiry into grooming gangs. And appointing this commission led by Louise Casey was seen as a way of actually outsourcing some responsibility to hopefully deal with it, and then they could move on. Actually, she came back and said, you need to have a proper inquiry into this. And the government have accepted all 12 recommendations. It is a bit of a hybrid situation. It's not really a full national public inquiry. It's giving inquiry level powers to coordinate local inquiries in 5 areas to look at what happened to both the policing and the investigation of cases of grooming gangs, and in particular, how questions around ethnicity were shied away from and not considered, but also how that data was just not captured. So there isn't the information. There's enough to draw some conclusions, but there is insufficient data just because it wasn't collected at the time. One of the things she said was, if good people don't grip difficult issues, in my experience, bad people do. And this is a controversial issue. It has proved, frankly, fodder for people, including Tommy Robinson and others, who have used this to take quite a racist approach to their politics and to try and garner support. I think it is really important that we don't shy away from difficult issues, don't shy away from difficult questions. And hopefully inquiries have a tendency to take an awful lot of time and an awful lot of money, but hopefully this will help get to some answers. There's been some criticism that, is it really going to ask questions on a national level of what was known within Whitehall, Dominic Cummings, Boris Johnson's special advisor, chief of staff, but also formerly Michael Gove's special advisor in the Department for Education, said there were efforts to cover this up way back in 2011. So there are questions to be answered about, on a national government level, about what was known and what was done. And hopefully this inquiry can address some of those things.
Yeah, look, I think it's a big reset moment. There are a lot of clips being played of people raising concerns 10, 12, 15 years ago, whatever the timeline, and being kind of dismissed. That said, I think we've got to be very careful about the kind of triumphalism in some elements, and acknowledge, I'll use my phrase, there is a vibe shift that this is even possible. I do think that's part of the reality. I think there's also a growing concern, more than think we are hearing, there's a growing concern about the rise of the right, the rise of reform, and there's an awareness of that from government. So some of the change in language and rhetoric is to stave that off from a political context. We need to acknowledge that too. I think Baroness Casey, I've just had a quick scan. I haven't reviewed the whole report by any stretch, but has done a fairly quick and really coherent job. And I think she's well trusted in that this is a useful report. There are going to be further conversations, and we have to be able to talk about race, religion, ethnicity, all those things in terms of what's going on in our own world. We have to not be afraid to talk about that and to talk about it in a wider cultural context here in the UK. So I think some of it's pretty basic. We need to have ethnicity data and other data in the things that are being recorded, and we can't be afraid to talk about that, because otherwise it will be weaponized. And that's the risk here, is by covering it up, the irony is the exact opposite of what they hoped has now happened, and they've made it easier for people to critique it.
Yeah. So I think this will definitely be an ongoing conversation as we kind of see what happens. But it is interesting kind of, if you are interested to read the report or the kind of headlines of it to see what's being said. And I'm sure we will respond as other things come out and the government kind of continues to engage with this. If you find the conversations that we have on Cross Section interesting, please do check out our social media. You can find links to other articles that we're writing on all kinds of things. And yeah, we'd love to be hearing from you about the conversations that you're finding interesting, whether it's the ones that we are having or the ones you want us to have. Please do get in touch with us at cross.section@eauk.org through the email, or do get in touch through our social media platforms. We are, on all of them. No, we're not. We're not on TikTok. Yet, maybe. But yes, we would love to hear from you. Now, we are going to move away from the kind of Westminster focus, the UK focus, and take a more kind of global approach. It's been a huge week in the Middle East. I mean, there's been ongoing things in the Middle East for a long time, but in kind of response to what happened on Friday with Israel attacking Iran, we are going to have the main bulk of our episode focused on that. As it is it's the 19th of June today, we have recorded an interview with David Yeghnazar from ELAM, which we are going to include. But we thought we'd just quickly touch on any updates that have happened in the last day or two. Peter, do you have anything kind of you want to bring up?
Well, I'm going to recommend a podcast called Cross Section. Back in season 6, episode 5, we looked actually at the history of the politics and the theology. And I actually went back and listened to part of it on a walk to remind myself of some of what was said. And it sounds very strange to say. I found it very helpful listening back, but it really was. We discussed the larger kind of context of this conflict. Then I think this week, we are now waiting to see are America going to get more involved. I was going to say involved, but they are already involved. I mean, there's serious talk from Trump and the team. Are they going to actually come fully in behind Israel? Has Israel been forcing their hand? What are the implications for Russia being weakened in terms of the engagement in Iran? What are the implications for China? If this escalates, a lot of commentators saying that there are no quick fixes. The West should have learned this. I was doing GCSE history with my daughter recently and reminded about the Iraq conflict and being reminded again of some of and Afghanistan. And they said, we'll just go in, we'll sort that out, and we'll put in a new democratic government. Just like the kind of craziness and simplicity sometimes of the thinking, and the massive kind of movement of people that is often caused by these situations. So all those things are in play from a political context, getting us thinking about it. And that episode takes us back to some of the theology around it, because there is huge theology. We'll probably wrap up on this again just before David's interview around Iran and Israel in particular again, as we think about that conflict. But I'll let Danny pitch in before.
Yeah, I was struck this morning. There's an article where I'm just getting the name right. Lord Hermer, who is the UK's Attorney General, warned that that UK involvement could be illegal, and it was reminiscing that of some of the conversations and discussions in relation to the Iraq War. I think I was thinking about this morning. There are kind of undesirable regimes the world round, and the question is actually, well, what role should we take and how should we engage militarily in relation to those? At what point does it cross a line that does justify military action? Is it only in defense of our allies? So that was the Attorney General's advice, that our involvement should only be in defense of our allies, which would be Israel in this context. So we have a justification to support Israel, but actually further action we wouldn't necessarily. I think the US involvement is unpredictable. Donald Trump is unpredictable, and his language, he was quoted as basically saying, only I know whether we're going to get involved. We might get involved, we might not get involved. I'm the only one who actually knows whether we're going to get involved. It's unpredictable, and I think that just levels and adds an additional layer of unpredictability and instability to already an incredibly difficult and unstable situation.
Well, I think we're going to wrap up to say Zanna has conducted a brilliant interview, as she was saying, with David. We've had a chance for a little sneak peek at that. Just what ELAM, one of our member organizations, is doing there, their insights into what is happening in Iran. So we were particularly just cognizant of the fact that all we can talk about is what we're reading in the press and what we're hearing out there, if you like, in the media and in social media, whereas David is able to connect with people on the ground. It's just a really wonderful reminder there are Christians in Israel, there are Christians in Iran, and there are Messianic Christians like in Iran and the complexity of the situation, just some wonderful stories of divine encounters with Jesus and all that's going on, that neither says this is a thing of God and a good thing that's happening, nor does he say it's bad, but the complexity, and there is no single Iranian view of what's happening. So I think just really helpful for us to be provoked around that, to see what God is doing in the midst of all that's happening. He has lots of prayer points, but the one I probably took away was just that there's a quick resolution, because it is having a massive impact on everybody in Iran. And it's easy for us to have some potentially naive views around that, or probably somewhat simplistic. And he really helps just both underline the complexity, but the need for prayer, and that so many Iranian Christians are impacted by this. So thank you, Zanna. Brilliant interview. I recommend you keep listening. It's going to drop in straight after this. Thanks for joining us, and hope you enjoy this kind of extended version or an episode of Cross Section.
Hello and welcome to this cross-section interview. At the end of last week, Israel attacked Iran as they launched dozens of airstrikes into Tehran. So we have sat down to record this in the morning of the 18th of June. So there have been about 5 days of conflict, and the situation is awful, and it can be really hard to know how, as Christians in the UK, we can respond. ELAM are a wonderful member organisation of the Evangelical Alliance, and they work to strengthen and support the kind of growing church in Iran. So we thought it was only right to have this conversation with them. So I am joined by David Yeghnazar, who is the Executive Director of ELAM, where he has served for the last 25 years. Thank you so much for joining us, David, at very late notice. This was only organised yesterday, and he is currently in Singapore. So we're very grateful that this could work. David, could you give us a really quick introduction to yourself and the work of ELAM?
Thanks, Zanna. It's good to be with you. And the work of ELAM, we exist to strengthen and expand the church in the Iran region and beyond. And we're, by God's grace, as many I'm sure have heard, that the church in Iran is growing rapidly. And we've seen the Lord do some beautiful things. And of course, this is very, very important, what's happening, not just for Iran, but for the whole region. And so we're glad to be here and share and talk about this, and really encourage people to pray for what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, we're, very grateful that we can have this conversation, and just kind of hear from your perspective in this. So I think we'll start with a bit of context to the kind of political situation. So the politics between the Iranian and Israeli governments have been sort of volatile for decades. Can you kind of briefly share the political and cultural history between the two nations, and kind of what the day-to-day experience of Christians in Iran is like?
Yeah, so of course actually beforehand, I mean, when we go back to Bible times, the Persian kings, King Cyrus, supported the rebuilding of Jerusalem. So actually, when you go historically, Iran has had a very good relationship with Israel, and there have been Jews in Israel since Bible times. And we did a Bible translation into modern Persian. One of our translators was an Iranian Jew who was a Messianic Jew. And so that, there are Jews in Israel, in Iran, and they've been there for a long time, and actually a very good relationship. When the Islamic regime came, though, and their stance towards Israel, obviously that changed, and so that there's this what everybody's aware of, just this very negative rhetoric, and you can go to Iran, and every day in Iran the regime will get people to say death to Israel, death to America, and there's the chants that grow are being said by people not willingly, but they're forced to. So the Islamic regime has had this stance against Israel very strongly. But interestingly, the people of Iran are not against Israel. I think it's really important for people to understand. Even in the last few days, we've had obviously just prayer meetings with Christians, and you wonder when people are being Iranian Christians when their country is being attacked. and spontaneously they're praying both for Iran and for Israel. And that's such a beautiful thing to see from the Christians. So the church has grown in Iran, and they're obviously praying for Iran, but it's beautiful to see that they're praying for Israel at the same time. And I've heard heartfelt prayers from people for both countries.
Thank you so much for sharing that, and just hearing some encouragement there. There is hope in what can seem so bleak. So thank you so much for bringing that. And that kind of feeds into the next question, which is kind of, since the attacks of last Friday, what has life been like for Christians in Iran? Can you kind of share the experience of those on the ground? Obviously, you're not there, but I'm sure you're kind of in communication with.
Yeah, we are obviously in communication.
Yeah.
The first, it's obviously shock, first of all. There'd been rumors and some people were expecting it, and whether it was in the public news or people feeling different things. But when it happens, number one, shock. And then fear. Obviously, people are afraid of what might happen to them and then just immediately, are they in immediate risk? Then there's the concern of what might happen just because of economically, it's a terrible situation in Iran. So it's sort of the medium term. And then, of course, it's the long term. Will this work out well or not? So, we put out a prayer email basically saying, pray number one for the innocent, pray for the families gripped by fear. And it's important to say it's not just one emotion. People react differently. There are some people, I saw a text message from one of our church members in Iran said today, I have absolutely no fear. I've been in prayer and the Holy Spirit has just been encouraging me, and I don't have fear. In fact, she said, she's a new believer, a believer from a Muslim background. She said to her husband, I read this in the text that she sent, she said to her husband, if I die, then just make sure that I get buried as a Christian. And that much confidence. On the other hand, there are people who are just afraid, they have not been able to hold it together. And that's the realities of war. War is not pleasant. And then you have the people have had to flee. They've had to leave their cities. You've seen the news. These are real things. This is not just news. This is actual happening on the ground. So people having to leave. But a couple of beautiful things that are happening. I've just been on a call with 50 pastors, and it's really lovely to both see the faith with which they're just standing, but also hear some of the stories. So this is just last night in Tehran. 2 nights ago in Tehran, as one lady, Christian lady, was leaving, trying to find a way to a bus, something or somewhere to get out of the city. She had some AirPods on, worshiping, listening to worship music, but praying for the city, praying for people as she was walking along the streets, and said, Lord, is there anybody you want me to encourage? She saw a family to the side who clearly in distress and almost sort of not knowing what to do. She went to them and talked to them, prayed with them, and they actually gave their life to the Lord on the side of the streets as they were trying to flee Tehran. There are other stories of people giving their lives to Christ. This was another one of somebody. One of the things that's happening beautifully in Iran with the Christians and even non-Christians, people opening their homes to people who are traveling and fleeing, evacuated Tehran or other places. So this one Christian couple went to somebody's home, a total stranger in a city of miles, a couple of 100 miles away from Tehran, and they started sharing their faith with their host. And he said, some people have been telling me about Jesus over the last year, and he was asking lots of questions, and yesterday that host and his wife both gave their lives to the Lord. So there is hope in the midst of the pain and the darkness. And what I just said to our people is that, the Lord has prepared them for this time. It's hard, it's difficult, but the Lord has prepared them. And it's really encouraging to see the faith that they have. But there's no doubt in my mind that the church in has quietly grown in courage and love over the last years. And whatever season Iran is entering, whatever new season, and without doubt, it will be different, however it turns out. But the church has a profoundly important task, which is to be salt and light, to care for the hurting, to point people towards Jesus. And I suppose I didn't expect to see it on the first 2 or 3 days, but it's actually happening, and it's such a joy. And yet, there's no laughter right now. There's no, it's very somber, but yet it's deep joy to see that actually people are. There's just something. It's a strange paradox.
Yeah, I think it's really helpful. You kind of talking about that mixture of emotions and just, there are just so many different things that people are feeling, but just thank you so much for sharing just the way that Christians are witnessing and just the way that God is at work in them. And I think that is such an encouragement that he isn't absent from this as much as it feels utterly terrifying.
And it is important to stress it is terrifying for some. And in this meeting that we were just on Zoom, we prayed for some of the pastors and leaders who are just feeling the weight of the world, and others who are feeling like they're hearing from God in the midst of it. So as people listen, please pray for leaders and for the Christians. And we said that there's no judgment, there's no pressure in terms of to put on a face. This is the reality of wars. But at the end, the church has a beautiful part to play in bringing the life and the love of Christ in the midst of the darkness.
Yeah, and I guess just for them to come together and to serve people, as people kind of day by day feel different emotions, I'm sure even hour by hour, minute by minute, it changes, but that they can come alongside people. So thank you so much for sharing that.
And let me just say this, because people are, I felt different emotions every day, and it's strange. You go to bed and you're not sure what you're feeling. But and there are many Iranian Christians in the UK, by the way, in some of the churches, I'm sure. Yeah. And I think it's really important. It's a great opportunity for any church that even has one Iranian just to listen to them. They are feeling it very heavily. And I think I would encourage any church that has an Iranian to listen to those, hear the emotions and pray with those church members.
Yeah, absolutely. So 2 Corinthians 5, Paul instructs the kind of believers that we have been given the ministry of reconciliation. Now, this is hard, but do you have any ideas how this works out in a political situation that is so delicate as the kind of Middle East, and kind of where language from each side, from the leadership, can just sort of escalate rather than kind of bring peace? Do you have any reflections on that?
I think Paul is talking to the believers,
and
he's talking to the church. And so I don't know if I can give any input into what political leaders can say from a Christian point of view. I mean, I think they could be, I think all of us would have opinions on how and what people should say. But also actions speak louder than words. So in so many ways. But, I think that's talking to the church, the ministry of reconciliation.
Yeah.
And it's the gospel is so much more beautiful and wonderful than we think. And it's not just about making peace. And I think in terms of a peace that's sort of a pause or a ceasefire. And another thing we've asked people to pray is not simply a pause in violence, but you want lasting peace. And ultimately, the ministry of reconciliation is about real, deep, soul-settling peace. That a peace that passes understanding, and I just don't believe that the politicians are the ones who carry that message. I mean, they could be if they're really doing it on behalf of the church. If they're doing it, but it's the church. It's the church that has that ministry of reconciliation. And it is the peace that passes understand. It's the peace that only Jesus can give, and we know that. And as we were talking to the believers just now, that they understand that. They've talked to people. In fact, some people have given their lives to Christ in the last few days because they've realized that the truth of the message of their friends. So it is, yeah, that's what I would say. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful ministry. It is such an incredible privilege for Christians to have that role. And of course, I think, non-Christians can learn from some of the language, but the reconciliation it talks about in 2 Corinthians 5 is, I think, far surpasses what any of us can actually think of and understand that the depth of the piece. So
yeah. And I guess, and as you kind of were touching on, like in all of this, it kind of comes back to those Christians that are on the ground, and they are the ones that are seeing the people on the side of the road and are able to be salt and light in those situations. And I mean, obviously this is also about the kind of the leadership and stuff, but as you say,
I mean, there are obviously different political perspectives even within the Iranian church. What should lead to peace? Does war lead to peace? Is this a necessary war? And I'm not going there with that, because there's so many different perspectives. But ultimately, like I say, the greatest ministry that we have is a different kind of, it's a different kingdom.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. This kind of, I guess, that conversation and the kind of information thing and lots of different opinions kind of feeds into my next question, which is kind of all about the media. Amongst kind of Western media outlets, whether they're Christian or mainstream, there are so many strong views on one side and this side, and this is right, this is wrong, this is what you should do, this is what, it feels like we're bombarded by kind of different messaging. Do you have any kind of input on where, as Christians in the UK, where we should be getting our news, or how we should be reading the news as we kind of look at evolving conflict? I mean, I'm not telling you to tell us which, where exactly to go, but I guess just how our attitude in that.
I'll just share my experience in the last few days. I'm not a social media person, but obviously in this situation, you're just trying to follow as much as possible. And number one, I would say the social media platforms where you're just hearing one voice over another and you're just following only one side of things, I think is really difficult, because it just totally consumes your mind, and you become so entrenched in one view and one voice. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't have an opinion, but I think it's important for people to understand what people are really, what they've lived through. And I would say that it's interesting to see, to hear from an Iran. In fact, the Iranian point of view is probably more, I think, probably offend some of the listeners, because some people, and this is only some, it's certainly not everybody, some are quite relieved that something is happening. They're not happy about it, but they are hoping it would lead to something good. I think there are some voices that would say it's not going to lead to anything good. And at the end of the day, I haven't spoken to a single person who wants war. But Iranians are people who have lived under 45 years of hardship. And imagine that, in the UK, we've lived under 45 years of oppression. There would certainly be some people who are happy that something would be happening, whether it's a pleasant way or not a pleasant, or a horrible way or not. They're hoping for something better. And so, in terms of answering the question, the question is, are there any Western media outlets that you'd like? I'm not really sure that there are many that I would really love on any side, because they all seem to have their own perspective. And I think you've got to, I'm not being very helpful. The only thing I'm saying is I wouldn't trust any one perspective, and I would be quite open to the idea of listening to different perspectives, looking at different channels that they have different views, and then go to the Lord in prayer and say, Lord, what is it that you're saying? So again, I just said to our leaders, guys, I know you're like me on your phone just looking every few minutes because you want to know, is this going to end? Is it going to escalate? But we must, and this is what we said, we must be spending time in prayer. in the Word of God and hearing God's voice more than being led by the news. And unfortunately, I think people are just led by, we're literally being led by the news, and our opinions are being formed by influencers here, there, and everywhere. And as Christian leaders, we're going to be led with the Word of God and what we know He has said. And there are some things we know, and there's some things we sense, but what we know in the Word of God, we must be reminded of in these times. But then news, you've got to actually, that has to then intersect with reality. And that's where maturity comes, and also listening to other Christian voices, other people in the church, and not being so dogmatic in your own opinion.
I mean, that was super helpful. You said, I don't know if I'm being helpful, but that was really, really helpful. And I think even just what you said about there are different opinions because of people's experience. And so it's from us where we don't understand what it's been like. It's that attitude of understanding that there are different opinions that are rightfully so, that they have come from that. And I think opening our eyes and expanding our kind of understanding of the situation to being like, there are different elements that we need to take in. And I'm so glad as well, just really encouraged by what you're saying about bringing it to the Lord, because asking for His guidance and His help, because it is really hard. And I think you're right, when we're bombarded by different messages, it can just feel completely paralyzing in knowing kind of what to take in and what to respond to. So that's really helpful. And that kind of theme of prayer kind of brings me in as we kind of come to our final question of how can the UK Church pray effectively for Christians in Iran, in the Middle East at this time, and I guess also for the work of ELAM, like what you guys are doing. How can we be praying for you?
Thank you. That's great. Pray for people, real people, with real emotions and real suffering and real hopes and real desires for, and I would say on all sides in Iran and Israel. It's really important. There are people who have obviously suffered. They've lost their loved ones. And then there's also people who this triggers all kinds of things. I have a colleague whose father was killed by the regime in Iran, and he's a worship leader. And to see how he responds in prayer and praying for the country, for the people of Iran, even for the leaders of Iran. It's a journey for all kinds of people who've suffered at the hands of this regime. But pray that there's such a desperate desire among the Iranian Christians to be salt and light at this time. They really want the light of Christ. They have found something beautiful, and this is what they need to understand. They have found the Lord. They found joy. They found peace. They found salvation, and they can see their country in such a devastating, destructive situation, and they just want people to know the Lord in this time. So pray that they would have the courage and the wisdom to make the most of the opportunity of loving people. The words are the conversations about comfort. It's about just showing people love at this time, but also having the courage to point people to Jesus. And then, of course, there's just going to be the hard rebuilding, if it gets to that, hopefully soon. One of the prayers is that this would be as short-lived as possible, and that there would be lasting peace. We're not, it's not just let there be a ceasefire. We want something that's lasting peace, and then whatever change, and like I said, there will be significant change. Whatever happens, I don't know either way it goes, but a prayer would be that any changes that do come would bring more blessing to people, more justice, more dignity, more freedom, and that at the end the church would be able to serve with compassion. It would be able to serve with wisdom and boldness and play its part. And I think it has a profoundly important part, as I said before. So, yeah. And for the work of ELAM, we want to, we train leaders. There will be, I think, a huge need in the coming months and years. And then discipleship. There will be many, many people who come to Christ. And we would love to see all these people who've come to know the Lord really grow and play their part in whatever Iran looks like in the future. So pray for discipleship. But then also that, and what I mean discipleship, I mean people who really look and love like Jesus. And as Iran needs to be rebuilt, that it's done through the community, not through a platform, but through the people on the ground, disciples in businesses and in hospitals and schools, wherever. Let them be the ones who bring and change, bring the light of Christ all over the country.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much for all of that. And if you are listening right now to this, I really encourage you to just stop and pray to bring all of this to the Lord. David, thank you so much for taking the time, for sharing all of this. That's really, really helpful. And I really pray that for all of us as we kind of engage with this and listen, that it will really kind of change the way we respond, and that we will keep responding. We won't just look at the news and then kind of get about our day, because how as Christians can we be doing that when this is going on? But thank you so much as well for the encouragements for our brothers and sisters that are declaring the name of Jesus, and what an amazing witness that is, and what a challenge that is to us as they just see how amazing it is to know Christ, and that is bigger than all of this. So David, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Hi, Alicia here. Thank you for checking out this episode. If you like it, please make sure to subscribe or share with a friend and leave a review. Till the next episode, take care and God bless.